the final session of the day. And the final session of the day is going to be quite interesting because what we want to do is to, after sitting for many long hours and discussing very technical, very challenging tax issues, we wanted to discuss and talk with people who are not tax as such, but whose lives and business and everyday businesses deeply touched by taxation and deeply influenced by it. So wanted to get their perspective on some of the things that we've talked about. I have the pleasure of giving the floor to my good friend and colleague Vikram Chand, who will be talking to Ms. Charlotte Winzer from Procter and Gamble, but I will allow Vikram to introduce our guest in more detail. And after their conversation, I will have a conversation with, I hope I can call him my friend. I have the honor of calling him my friend, Nebojša Bjelotomić. Nebojša is somebody with whom I have had and with whose association I have been in cahoots. We have been comrades in arms for the last 4 to 5 years. It's the Digital Serbia initiative. And interestingly enough, from a country whose traditional biggest export was agriculture, we have become a country in a short period of years whose biggest export is IT. And we have been working significantly on how to improve the competitive position of the Serbian IT, how to keep our talent in the country, how to prevent the brain drain. And we've been somewhat even successful in it. So we'll talk a little bit about what challenges lie ahead. So thank you. And Vikram, please.
Thank you, Swetislav. So I would just like to introduce everyone to Ms. Charlotte Winzer. She is the head of tax of Procter and Gamble and responsible for European operations. I mean, outside the US operations, or you including the US operations now?
I don't include the US. I include the entire international business.
Okay,
So I'm not claiming that Europe is the rest of the world outside of the US.
Exactly. So, thank you for that small clarification. So, we are going to structure our discussion in basically three segments. In the first segments, we're just going to talk about what a big multinational like Procter and Gamble, who has a huge turnover, and what was the last global turnover which you had for?
Close to 70 billion.
Close to 70 billion. So that's the number which you just mentioned, which is quite a lot. So there are 70 billion turnover plus companies. So the idea here is just to speak about the challenges which they face under the current international corporate tax system. Then we'll just look briefly into the Pillar 2 and Pillar 1 system. And finally, we'll jump into the mobility topic and what issues you see from a mobility standpoint. So let's just start with the challenges in the current international tax system that you face. And could you just tell us right now what kind of controversies that you are dealing with on a day-to-day basis on the tax treaties or the transfer pricing front?
Yeah, happy to. So first of all, if this conference has achieved one thing, it is my assumption of uncertainty has further increased, and I'm going to be faced with more sleepless night and have no concrete work plan how to really work it. So I still need to do a noodle quite a bit about that topic. No, currently, what are the key topics that we are faced with? One is I see a significant change in attitude of auditors. And this is not just the developing world. The developing world used to be often not very sophisticated from the auditors on the ground. And it used to be definitely very much about revenue raising. Whereas in the developed world, you very often had very disciplined auditors, and it was about to get to the appropriate answer. And actually, we've, as a company, we've always liked sophisticated auditors because then you can have a proper technical, legal, financial, valuation, you name the subject matter discussion. The people are still there, but I recently had an auditor in a developed world in Europe telling me, and the situation was very different a couple of years ago, I'm also a grandfather. I have grandchildren. My grandchildren need a good education system, and I'm here to make sure that the state has the money to pay for it. Kind of, and you're the ones who have to pay for it. So that is definitely a huge change in attitude that we are seeing. So within that, when you then go on the more technical subject matters, what do we see? We see DP adjustments on routine functions mainly. So we are running a centralized business model, and the corporate structure follows the business model. So we have predominantly in the countries routine functions with the respective routine low risk remuneration structures, all supported by the respective transfer pricing documentation. And still, we do see significant challenges on those. Often the developing world doesn't want to accept regional benchmarks, but there are often no local benchmarks. So it's very difficult to then have those discussions. Other things we see predominantly in the developing world is tax deductible on intercompany services from both senses. One is they partially don't understand why it is a service even, specifically when you think about cost charges for senior management support. That is very often more considered to either IP or shareholder obligations is one of the two. Or where it is clearly hard fact services, people understand that, but they are claiming that when you would have bought these services in country and provided them, it would have been much cheaper, overlooking that by the usage of this, what I call the big machine, so this huge PNG thing, they're also buying a lot into advantages that they don't necessarily see on a day-to-day basis, like agility when there's a change. They have a service center, they pick up the phone, everything is changed tomorrow. To be able to do that, you need to have the capacity to do that, and you're paying for that in some sort of form. So these are things are not necessarily understood. And then for sure, characterization specifically around royalties versus services, etc., for withholding tax purposes. These are the key things that we see on an international tax basis. And then for sure, you have a lot of local subject matters that I guess you are all aware of. VAT is always a fun one, you know, we had some formality mistakes trying to get a lot of revenue, and a lot of countries have huge penalties behind those. So this is one for revenue raising. VAT is the best tax to go after.
Yeah, that's interesting. So on the tax treaties front, you see a lot of issues on characterization on technical services, royalties, on the transfer pricing stuff, remuneration for low risk structures. But now the question to you is, so what is the strategy you follow for within a big multinational for dealing with all these disputes? Let's start with the resolution side. Suppose there's a fight and you get into a fight with the tax administration. What do you do on a resolution side?
Yeah. Maybe first, already many years ago, we have really started a full strategy to try to get as much upfront certainty as possible. As a Wall Street quoted company, and we have to publish our books on every quarter, we are depending on that we can predict how these numbers are looking like, and this is by line item. So our CFO expects us to be able to manage that. So there is neither good news nor bad news is good news or bad news. No news is good news. So no surprise. That is the guidance I'm getting. Tell us what you expect, we work with it, and then you stick to it. So within that guidance, we have developed a huge APA strategy. So, and we have many bilateral APAs around the world, and we have been very successful behind that to achieve a lot of certainty in a lot of areas. So where we have routine activities that are repeatedly, because to go through APAs is difficult, and we come to that, we've done that. So that was helpful. Now, when I get into an audit and it gets nasty, then for sure, in a first instance, very often we want certainty and we don't like litigation because it does not give you the certainty. It keeps it too long open. It's made for surprises. You never know what a judge does, specifically on the lower levels. Very often the higher level judges are better educated and you have a better feel for what might be the outcome. But on the lower levels, you are for surprises very often. And that, as I said, we don't like that. So you're trying to negotiate very often. An audit is not just a technical discussion. It is a negotiation at the end of the day. When that all doesn't work, then we do defend our rights, sometimes for principal reasons, sometimes for materiality reasons, depending on the situation. We try to revert to MAP procedures and use those. And we try to use local litigation. Both processes and MAP specifically are taking extremely long. We have MAP cases that are close to 20 years long and still unresolved. And we are not talking a lot of money, but by now it's a principal thing. So, And we as a taxpayer are almost out, other than we need to provide information, but the two authorities just cannot agree. So for us, a forced resolution process where the two authorities need to agree upon is something that would be very welcome, just because to get an end to the thing. And again, on these MAP cases, I still recall that, again, an EU country telling me about a year or so before the EU introduced forced arbitration, there's one of their CA leaders was telling me he didn't understand why this was needed between educated people. You should always be able to agree upon things. This is a country, the MAP case is over since 15 years, and the case in itself is 30 years old. So they still can't agree, and we don't have zero idea by when they will be able to agree. So that just tells you this is, in today's world, not a very effective process.
so, so that's good. At least on the prevention side, you go for bilateral APAs to the extent possible for transfer
Yes.
pricing matters, and then you also do you have unilateral APAs?
We try to avoid them. We are a big believer in bilateral. Sometimes when you cannot get a bilateral APA because either it's just not foreseen in the respective legislation or a country is not willing to, but they are willing to give us a unilateral or a ruling, we would also go for unilateral APA. As we also go for local rulings to the extent they are available on big transactions just to get certainty. So it's all about certainty.
Yeah. So thank you for that. So if you see in so far we just spoke about the challenges in the current system, and like you rightly said, you have the philosophy of trying to get tax certainty as soon as possible. It's only in the worst case scenario you go for litigation and MAP and so on and so forth. But now if you move to the new landscape, the Pillar 1 and the Pillar 2 system, just to start with Pillar 2, I just finished off a presentation and we just spoke about these Pillar 2 rules. So actually, Pillar 2 rules, they're domestic law rules. Now, these rules will be implemented in the national tax law of countries. And the way the rules work is that these rules, depending on the situation, taxing rights under these rules can be allocated to different countries. So countries where the QDMTTs are levied, countries where can impose the IIR or the UTPR. So there are many situations where Pillar 2 taxing rights can be allocated to several locations, to several jurisdictions. But what you see in the model rules is nothing at the moment. And so, what's your take on that? How would you deal with this right now? What would your wish be then?
We definitely need a mechanism to resolve disputes between countries on that one in the first instance. And the disputes are, can see the writing on the wall, and that doesn't start with who is got a taxation right allocated. It starts with the basics, because the countries are not used to tax auditors tend to be not, one is they often are not even accountants, and we start from an accounting framework as you were laying out. As a big company, we will be starting from US GAAP. This is not that this is a very well-known accounting framework by a lot of tax auditors. What we've started to model, we need to take interpretation of what is sitting in the rules. So we are spending huge amounts of time trying to find out what may be the appropriate interpretation. When I see that then with, I don't know how many different tax authorities in the world, who today, when they look, for example, at CFC rules, they often impose their local tax framework to test the CFC rules. They are not working from GAAP, they are not even from local GAAP. They start with their own local tax rules. Suddenly you force them to use US GAAP. So it will be starting that they look at the data, by country, not by legal entity. And then they say, I don't understand anything. Can you please reconcile this against what you have put on your local tax return? And that is where we will be first time dead in the water, because this is close to impossible. We will go through that work, but this will be extremely difficult, and they will try to challenge every single little adjustment that's on that way that may be helpful for them. So that is my first writing on the wall, just the pure execution. And then they will take a position for whatever reason, rightly or wrongly, misunderstood or not, and that will then result in the dispute. So we need a very, very effective dispute resolution. We need an arbitration court or something that within a stipulated time frame that they have to do it. And they need to become also all much more current in their audit cycles. We have countries that are very far behind in audit cycles. So ideally what you want is that every single given fiscal year of a multinational group is also more or less audited at the same time across the globe, because then you can match it all, because we also need to match it, whether you're talking pillar 1 or pillar 2, you will always have corresponding matching entries on some other side.
Yeah.
And when then your audit only comes 5 years later and the rest of the world is halfway already audited, the correction exercises are huge. So you would ideally, you want that all within a very short time period.
Yeah. So actually, the way the rules stand right now, there's no binding dispute prevention or resolution framework. There's a lot of work done on the safe harbor front, saying that, well, if a jurisdiction complies with the safe harbor, or it falls within the scope of the safe harbor, top-up tax calculations for that jurisdiction are exempted. But there are many situations where, companies won't fall within the context of the safe harbor. So what I understand from you, you're looking for something binding and not something which is at the mercy of the tax administration. And you also mentioned about Pillar One. Very interestingly, for all Pillar One enthusiasts, yesterday the OECD released a document on tax certainty for issues related to Amount A and beyond Amount A, 230 pages.
Yeah.
Did you read it already?
No. That makes for good nighttime reading to overcome my uncertainty, I guess.
So, but what's your take on this? 230 pages where they speak about some, if you have, let's say, an Amount A issue, an issue on the calculation of Amount A, and if the taxpayer doesn't agree with this calculation, it can go to its home state tax administration, which will then sit with the tax administration of 6 to 7 countries. And if these 6 to 7 countries' tax administrations don't come to a particular conclusion, then another panel will be set up. And in this other panel, academics can also sit in this other panel, by the way. Another panel will be set up. And then finally, you think tax certainty can be given on Amount A. What do you think about these panels? Just do you think it's possible for 6 to 7 people to
Allow me
come
to
to?
be sarcastic to start off with. When I started my professional career, I had a boss who told me anything you can't write down on the backsheet of an envelope is anyhow too complex and you haven't understood it. So that's to the 230 pages, meaning then you can't really do it in a management summary, very concise, or how our former CFO put it. When my old Aunt Mary, you can't explain it to her, it most likely means you have yourself not understood it, not the gist of it. So that's the starting point. Now, I think from what I said before on what my idea on a binding resolution process is, what you're describing is just going to end up in endless discussions. You're never going to get it.
Can I jump in, because now I am looking at Svetlana Buryak, and why I'm looking at her is she's Ukrainian. I remember a Ukrainian case from the European Court of Human Rights, and I'll tell you why. Because now you've said that the OECD has come out with a document that is 230 pages related to legal certainty with respect to an aspect of Pillar 1, not all of it, an aspect of it, right? Now, under the European Court of Human Rights law, in order for a law to be law, okay, it's not enough that the law is enacted by Parliament. That's the formal aspect. There is a substantive aspect that it needs to fill, and it is in a case, and I don't remember the name, but in this Ukrainian case from 2011, this doctrine got turned into came into tax law as well. The law needs to be law needs to be sufficiently clear enough so that the taxpayer is capable of comprehending it, albeit with professional assistance. Now, if the law is so unclear that you can't apply it even with professional assistance, then that law is not law, and paying taxes in accordance with that rule is contrary to the European Convention on Human Rights. And this is established jurisprudence. Now, the problem is that it's always quite difficult to draw this line, and we have the European Court of Human Rights dealt with some, let's say, extreme cases of unclarity. But sometimes the intellectual capacity that is necessary for grasping some of what is being proposed is preposterous. So, and I think actually we could be in the ambit of this jurisprudence of the European Court of Human Rights and the legality of the rules based on the elementary principle that the law needs to be comprehensible for well, not even an average human being, but a relatively intelligent one. Okay. So thank you.
Our CXOs aren't Mary, I guess. So
No, no. Coming back now to this topic of mobility, what you've seen over the past 2 days, and we've seen about corporate tax and mobility. We've heard a lot about it. So, what is P&G's take on all mobility-related issues that you see, and how are you dealing with this? What were your biggest takeaway from this conference?
sleepless nights. So no, not really. I think mobility and the corporate tax aspects, I think we are very aware of. The question is how we deal with this. Today, we are very, very conservative in terms of we are forcing people to reside and to work in certain locations. And we have looked at how important they are in terms of the traditional ways of how to think to where to allocate value to. There, the biggest question will be how sustainable is that at a time when the talent base is pretty rare? So the talents can, to some degree, potentially at some point decide where they want to work, because otherwise we just won't get the right talent anymore. So how long can we sustain our restrictive way of dealing with that? So that's on the corporate side. And then for sure, all the developments that we've discussed during the day, where I think nobody in the room had an answer to. And
We
then
added to more confusion.
yeah, added to more confusion, exactly. Then you have the more on the employment side, and there I'm getting very afraid when I see how that the thresholds of making people either taxable or subject to social security is kind of becoming lower and lower and lower. Because, and there are no certainty mechanism that we can get to. And even if there would be theoretical ones, when I was thinking about it, I'm not sure how practical they are for a company like P&G. When I think about what we saw during the pandemic, a lot of the people who were normally sitting in the headquarters went back home. Some of them in much lower cost locations. So our headquarters tend to be in very high cost locations. And then when the pandemic was clear, we were reopening the offices, often they left their spouse with the kids in the grandma nanny model, very cost effective and nice for everybody. And the person working for P&G returned to the headquarters, specifically in Europe, because the distances are low, maybe in a small apartment, saving a lot of money. Corporate tax-wise, we are fine, but then they're going back into their home country on a very regular basis to spend time with their families, and that's easily to be paid just out of the cost differences between the two locations. We are not, and we cannot track their travel today, I think, without getting into violence with GDPR. You know, they can do what they want, and from time to time they can live there. We can ask them, yeah, this is our principles, and you are not allowed to do this. They sign that off, whether they are doing it or not. I can't track that. Now, these are very, very different circumstances. I can't even go for rulings there, because one may be a Turkish case with a grandma, and the next one may be a Portuguese case with a baby, and the third one is yet some are married, some are not married, whatever kind of circumstances you have. And yes, we can go and say, okay, when something fails and you suddenly become taxable in the other country, it's your problem. Unfortunately, that's not the case, because we are obliged to withhold taxes for payroll. We are obliged to withhold taxes for social security. And both things are, at least in a European context, very fast subject to criminal liability by the respective managers and management boards. And that one, how do I protect them? I don't know. So this is something that I felt was very disturbing today to see, or yesterday predominantly, to see how these thresholds are coming down and down, and I don't have an answer today. The other one for sure is in the influencers.
Yes, that's a very important one. And, we spoke a lot about influencers yesterday, and you engage a lot of influencers, some of your products to market your products, and you make payments to them. So we spoke about a case where probably a payment is being made by a German company, the influencer is living in Dubai, and then you have the place where they are influencing, or they're trying to influence people, Germans, to come to Mallorca in Spain.
Yeah.
So basically, this is what you see. And what are the withholding tax traps that you see here? So how do you go about, because on payments, yeah.
Yeah, it's all what you said is what is even the value driver? Is that the photo that lady takes in Mallorca, click, click, click? And I take Mallorca for those who are maybe less known to the fact that Mallorca is almost considered to be half German, because half German and the other half is Brits. So, so you just see that a lot. And then, is that the photo? Is that when the photo is posted on the net? At that time, the lady may already be back in her Dubai, wherever she is residing. Is that the clicks afterwards that she gets paid for? And forget about the fact whether she is qualifying as an entertainer or an actor, when we at the same time tell her, but you better make sure that you wash your shampoo with Pantene in the right way. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't have the answer.
So because that creates, you need to know
where
when
we
you start.
really know is kind of when she says, okay, I'm in Dubai and I want Dubai, then I tell her, where is really your, where are you really residing? What is your beneficial ownership in terms of your place? Because the piece that we are used to is celebrities who have some nice beach locations in the typical palm tree islands that we had for many years. I recall a case where it was, I don't know anymore, a Latin American soccer player. I don't know whether Brazilian or Argentinian. They are the ones who are producing the best soccer players, from what I recall.
You're coming from Germany and you're saying that.
I'm not a soccer fan, so
Okay.
I can say that. He was playing for Bayern München, and our Swiss entity had employed the guy. But we had to pay the money from Switzerland to one of these beach islands, Bahamas, Bermuda, whatever. And in those situations, we are going and say, you need to prove to us that this is really where that is resident, and what kind of, either it's a treaty or non-treaty and so on. And in case of doubt, we are withholding on a higher rate and give it there. That's the only thing we can do. But that becomes very difficult by the influencers, because they tend to travel around like crazy. It's very difficult. And nobody can even tell us what is taxable.
Yeah, so that's another big issue. So, what are your expectations now from policymakers for this? Because we had a session setting the scene where we had the policymakers. They're not here right now. Except I don't know if Patricia Brown is still here. No, but okay. But you have so anyhow, probably they'll watch a recording of this. So, what is your wish for them, and how do you expect the work of these policymaking organizations to evolve on the mobility front or on the tax certainty front?
Yeah, I think one is to be able to get, whether it's ruling or dispute resolution, very fast and in set timeframes, as we've already said. On the mobility front, it would be good, I think, to have something like safe harbors on a reasonable level. So when I heard this, what was it? This economic benefit when a person comes one day to Germany.
Yeah. Economic employer, yeah.
Economic employer can't work with that. So can we have some thresholds that at least give us a reasonable amount of certainty? Then I am very critical about the fact when they, instead of the authorities telling us what we made wrong, we need to prove that we were right, which we cannot because GDPR hinders us to be able to do it. That conflict somehow needs to get resolved, because I'm not allowed to do what I'm asked to do. Now, this is not just a tax comment on GDPR. We see that in many fronts on GDPR, but it is clearly the case for tax. So these things are not speaking to each other anymore. And that is where policymakers need to make sure that they holistically look at it. It's whether it's GDPR, whether it's labor law that was mentioned, absolutely critical, so that we understand what type of a worker it is.
And I think you also made a wonderful point that I just want to re-emphasize, because I think it's very important when you were talking about the fact that the lack of alignment between accounting legislation, on the other hand, introducing rules which presume the existence of a common reporting system when such a system does not exist, is actually something which is hindering the application of all of these rules. And the point that I understood that you were making is that when they draft the rules, they need to look at the reality in which the corporations actually exist, and not some invented system which the drafters live in only.
Yeah, no, I agree. I also understand it. It's very difficult to develop an overall framework just from the bottom. Somehow the bottom and the top need to come and match, because you have to have a vision, and then the two somehow need to match. But right now it seems that the vision in combination for revenue raisers, given that the budget pressure is so big, and that's not going to become less with the world where the world is externally at this point. The budget pressure will further increase, and for the revenue raising component will further increase. And then it's even more important that this is somehow balanced. Governments need to understand when they are suffocating us, we cannot grow the markets anymore. We cannot grow the economy anymore.
Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. Before I hand it over back to Svetoslav, I just wanted to ask people from the audience if you have any comments or you want to ask any questions. Mukesh?
I just wanted a question from an in-house tax function standpoint. You talked about the emphasis on APAs. Uh, I'm sure you would have done the cost benefit analysis and measured that it's overall beneficial. How much time is invested by the in-house functions? Because there's a fair bit of management commitment. And are you concerned about confidentiality of your information because you're negotiating several bilateral and unilateral APs?
We invest significant time in the APAs. So on the documentation side, I think we are by now pretty efficient just because we have the benefit of following a consistent business model. So the functional analysis is pretty consistent and just needs to be tested against certain peculiarity of a market. So that is that piece that maybe in the initial phases took a lot of time, and we started that program 20 years ago. But I think that phase today is very efficient. When it then comes to we are talking to the authorities, this is where the time investment comes, because very often we need to educate them on how we are running the business. We allow them to interview our respective management bodies. That then means for sure we need to work with the management bodies, that they understand where the authorities come from. We don't want them to represent something that's not true. But when they start with PNG language, starting with all our nice three-letter abbreviation, nobody at the government level will understand them. So we need to make sure they speak proper, understandable English and talk about the thing not in PNG language acronyms when they talk about things, but that they make it something that you could read in a newspaper. So we need to work with them up front. That means that they need to invest time, we need to invest time. Are we concerned about confidentiality? I think we discuss it from time to time. I'm almost looking at Lindsay, who is really practically more involved in that than I am. But I'm not aware that we've seen that type of confidentiality ever been broken by a government so far. And therefore, I think it's not a really significant concern of ours.
Confidentiality rules.
Yeah.
So we're pretty fine. But on Charlotte's point, APAs, especially bilateral ones, can take years.
Yeah.
I mean, we're lucky if we get through one in 4 years, 5 years. So it's a significant investment, but that's how important we think the certainty is that we get from those APAs.
Andres, he's behind you. Maybe you can just pass the mic to him.
Thank you. Well, this question might be quite out of the scope of income taxes, but in as much as the title is MNEs and tax certainties, I have a question because I was very shocked in a meeting in Spain with the responsible of taxes of the biggest Spanish manufacturer, which is the only group that will be potentially under Pillar 1 in Spain. Maybe 2, but they are for sure. You know what I'm talking about. And this gentleman told us, well, look, we're not worried about Pillar 1 because we know it's not going to happen. But what we are worried is that there is so often the discussion on digitalized groups, digitalized economy. That's not our concern. Our biggest concern is custom duties. We are suffering custom duties day after day in jurisdictions. So it quite shocked me because, you know, we academics, we are obsessed with income taxes. And I wanted to check whether that main concern of that big manufacturer is also one that other manufacturers might have in practice. Thank you.
Yes, we have that concern, depending on where you are in the world. Now, we tend to produce relatively close to where our consumers are for pure transport, cost, logistics reasons. We have very little products that we are, sending around the globe. Gillette razor blades is one of them. Clearly, their customs is a big concern. But Pampers, you wouldn't ship around very far. It's just too bulky. And then you tend to have customs unions in that regions. And so as we are set up our manufacturing locations, we pay a lot of attention to it. But it is a concern when we are, for example, as we are managing distributor pricing. That is, we may be in a position that we can send a credit note in the country because a managed distributor price is very, very difficult, and you'll never get to the answer you want to be exactly. But when we are sending a credit note afterwards, it means we have overpaid customs before. And I'm sure we are losing a few millions a year there across the globe.
So much money wasted, and it could have been actually invested in academic research then. Huh?
You help me to manage the distributor pricing, we can maybe think about a fee structure there.
Yeah. Well, if we can amount B deal for you at a very reasonable rate, then you fund academia. Marco, yeah, sorry, Satyala, then I hand it over to you.
Yeah.
First, I would like to thank another very inspiring discussion on this seminar. Personally, I got highly inspired, so I would like to express my gratitude. Charlotte, I have a question. Something we did not address. So we talk about increased mobility. So there are challenges, obviously, in the tax system. Yeah, we talked about social contributions. But another force, another animal, basically, is the regulator. Yeah, personally, I'm in the field of financial services, and in financial services, cross-border issues are very sensitive, and because of increased mobility, it would probably be a nightmare to have a permanent establishment, for example, a regulatory. A permanent establishment abroad, because you never want to mess up with a tax authority. You never want to mess up with a social security because it can be very, very costly. But today, you certainly do not want to have an issue with a regulator. Is that an issue also for you?
For us, not very much, because we are not by and large in not very regulated businesses. We have a small pharmaceutical part of it. Yes, there we talk about regulators, but there the mobility issue is not so much a thing. This is when the product gets on the market, so meaning when it gets out of the plant or it gets to the pharmacy or so. And this by nature is pretty immobile because it's a physical transaction and you need a physical person who stands there and does whatever needed to get done. So that for us is, from a mobility standpoint, not really an issue.
Okay, thank you. Maybe just another thought. We don't have to deep in, but maybe I'm mistaken. But recently I read, in the United States, companies were using WhatsApp, for corporate communications. So again, I'm a financial intermediary. I'm sure also in my country, that would probably a severe issue. So I just want to say we have to be very careful. Also, new technologies. It's not.
Our company would not be happy when I start using
Yeah.
WhatsApp when I'm talking to Mukesh.
I just want to say, that would be a regulatory issue, maybe, and with severe implications for a company.
Yeah. I think we stop now, and Svetislav, back to you now.
Thank you. So now we continue with something between me and Nebojša, and I will defend Nebojša. He's not a tax person, as I've told you already.
My tax knowledge is I know Sveta.
Forgive him this. But yesterday we talked about a group of people that maybe Charlotte gave us a taste of what we're going to talk about, and she said the influencers are moving constantly. They're always on the go. And yesterday, Nebojša said you are missing a huge portion of society, of the workforce, and he touched upon something that's a very dear subject to me personally, on the topic of the digital nomad. And where do they fit into this picture of this extreme global population? The one thing that I would like to sound out, Nebojša, because you come from the IT world, you come from the world where the digital nomad is probably the most prevalent population. When I've done my research in 2018, 2000, I published on this. We in order to get to the number of how many of them are there, what I had to do actually, because there are no numbers, I had to go to the tourist association because these people travel a lot, and it's the tourist business that keeps track of them because they are a very significant population in this business, and we're talking about tens, if potentially hundreds of millions of people. Now the problem is that we in the tax world don't know what we talk about, what we are talking about when we start mentioning the term digital nomad, because you will hear many countries saying we're introducing incentives for the digital nomad, but the people that incentives are being drafted for are not nomads at all. They're remote workers, and you're trying to attract them to come for a relatively longer period of time. So I wanted to ask Nebojša, what is actually a digital nomad? When we talk about this population, who should we be talking about?
Uh, we're, so first, I'm really honored to be at this event, and I think it's unbelievable caliber of people that obviously know what they're talking about. And you guys get me completely messed up because last night I spent night reading your article, because when I told him about digital nomad, he said you have to read the article very professionally. So this is what I did. And then I found in there a quote for, I believe, Mr. Gretz, saying that
Michael Gretz, yeah.
that you are wedded to outdated concepts. And that's how I felt yesterday, whole day. That you guys talking here are talking about stuff that are very outdated from two standpoints. One is that you live in the physical world, and digital is becoming a very part of that physical world. It's not separate world. And second, somehow, more and more I feel that we live in the world of baby boomers, that I hope they will not take it with them. Uh, and that we don't see what's happening with the younger generation. And younger generation have completely different view of ownership, of employment, of life at the end. So digital nomads tend to be generally very young people who worked in usually digital professions that change their place of living on almost like a several weeks base. So they move every 2 or 3 weeks, and they also don't consistently work for one employer. They work on projects that take several weeks as well. So as yesterday we were discussing, so a person can be living in Serbia for 3 weeks, working for Japanese Japanese company, being paid somewhere in Scandinavia, and then spend that money after 3 weeks somewhere in Thailand, because that person just moved to Thailand and took on the job from the United States. And this might be an extreme example because usually these guys work on startups, and nowadays I work for IBM and Fujitsu and Siemens, and all of these topics are very close to my mind. But last 5 years or so, I spent mostly in the startup world, and startup world is very much digital. And as opposed to stability and predictiveness that you want in the big companies, startups need things to change quickly. And the way the things are structured right now, and the way taxation is done, it almost from the standpoint of the startups and digital people involved in it, it doesn't make sense. Yesterday, I was here listening to a colleague from Poland, and she was talking about e-sport games, and she was saying where is this is happening. My answer is happening on server, somewhere where there's a lot of water, electricity, and space. And I don't know, you might think that you need to tax the guy from Dubai playing the video game or the guy watching him, but in the end, if you're talking about, and that's very popular with young generation, the total price meaning not just what you're paying for your product, but also the effect that creation of your product have on society, on economy, on ecology. You need to consider that, and younger people are much into that. And the thing is that the startups in today's world, uh, they're being attracted either west from Europe or east of the Europe. Europe is the last place when startup feels that they can succeed. And we see that today's economy is pretty much driven on digital companies and value of digital companies. And if you try to get founder from Estonia who is having Eastern European engineers, salespeople in Germany and France, and finance somewhere, who knows where, to explain to him where to pay taxes or where his people should be paying taxes and what his company should be withholding these taxes. He's feeling that he's going to something that he doesn't want, he doesn't need to deal, and then with all the VC money already being in the United States, he's going to go to Delaware. And then Europe will still be missing Google. And just a poll question. How many of you use Discord as a messaging service? Discord. One. How many of you know? Two. How many of you know what's Discord? Okay. So two. And if you want to talk to high school people right now, you need to use Discord. Discord is the messaging platform used on the console games, and the kids playing the games talk to each other, but they don't stop talking to each other on Discord and go to WhatsApp. They continue talking Discord. And if you want to talk to them, you need to have Discord. And our room here that creates a lot of how these kids are going to be taxed, doesn't know how to talk to them. Can hit the channel, and that's a serious concern. And then when we go to their new habits of, like, look at the number of driver license and car ownership under 25. They don't want to, like, because we teach them don't drink and drive, so when they usually want to go out, they need a car, but they cannot drive and drink, so they don't have a car. And the next thing, I mean, I was being pretty ironic the way my generation can be, and I was saying to millennials, I respect your, you don't want material stuff, you all inexperienced, but I was like, I will see you when you get the first child and first mortgage. And then they got to that, and they're still into experience, and they're still more, do I know their name and how they treat them at the work than how much I pay them. And then the guys afterwards, about what about 2000 and younger, are even more in this non-material world. And the way we tax them is going to, I mean, they're going to vote with their feet. And then if you take one, and I'll be stopping at this point, is that if you take the number of baby boomers in Europe and number of X generation and you add it up, and then you take X generation and millennials and you end it up, you're missing 20% of people. You're missing 20% of workforce. And to make up this workforce, you need to keep every single of the guys coming afterwards. And if you don't have the legislation and rules and taxation that makes sense, while states or somewhere in the east has it, these guys are going to just walk by, not just working digitally in these countries, but kind of moving out of Europe.
What I am interesting, and this is now where I'm going to try to be smart, which is not an easy exercise, is to pick up something that you just said, but to make sense out of something that from the first glance doesn't make sense. So what you said is the value is where the server is. Now, from a practical perspective, what you say is written in the commentary that was developed some 30 years ago and introduced into the commentary to Article 5 of the OECD model. That's the chapter on e-commerce. And the chapter on e-commerce essentially says the value is where the PE is where the server is. Now, what I do, just so you know, is I give it to my master students. I give them this chapter because the OECD model convention, the commentary, that's sort of our tax Bible. And because I'm very heretical and I want to make the students heretical because I think that's the core of education, I make them read this part on e-commerce and I tell me if that makes any sense, because I think it makes absolutely no sense. Why? Not because you're not making sense, but from the perspective of income tax, the server as such creates no value. It is meaningless from the perspective of income tax. But what you are saying is something different, is that our view in which it is income tax and consumption tax, and that's direct and indirect tax, that's an outdated world, because in a world which is suffering so and is to suffer so much from the results of climate change, from the abuse of the planet, what we have to do is to tailor our tax systems in a different way in which to compensate for the damage done to the planet and for the price that we need to charge, basically, in order to prevent some of the consequences. Now, that's not income tax. However, that doesn't mean that this element shouldn't be more, because for 30 years ago we were laughing at the concept of eco taxes. That was a hippie crazy idea. No more. So essentially, what we need to do is basically rethink, because from one thing that I have as a tax person, one thing that I had a problem with BEPS, especially action on hybrids, is that somehow when I read it, it was taxed somewhere, no matter where. Right? That the taxation was the point. But why? because taxing something without you knowing for what the tax is being imposed, why do you want it, what the money is going to be spent on, makes absolutely no sense. But if I know that I have, and this is where I think we are missing a lot of potential for joint action. So Serbia is a landlocked country. So why do I care what happens in Fukushima, right? Well, I do, because the tuna fish that I eat on my table, that might be affected. And the sun shines over all of us. So I can't hide from global warming. There's no hiding from it. Thus, some of these things may require joint financing. And because we need to finance certain things which are global, then we might need global sources of revenue to fund these expenses. So the logic that you're saying, in which you're saying, well, the server is something, or is something that's eating up the environment. It is spending electricity, it is spending water, it is using up valuable resources. So make it pay for it. It's absolutely valid. The only problem is it's not income taxation. But then that brings us to the task to develop tax principles to another position. So I'm gonna give because he's very impatient, and I want to give Gianmarco Cotani from Netflix the chance to jump in.
You touch a very important point. First of all, I wholeheartedly agree with you that on the server part, but as I mentioned to you this morning, many authorities around the world think, oh, server has a lot of value. So maybe a provocative thought now here, looking at what you just said is, so we are in a moment, we are living a social economic times where we have a possible looming war. I'm sorry, I don't want to be, I'm generally optimistic, but now it's regional. A lot of people, I deal with a lot of people in the United States, they think this is a war like any other, but you never know if it can turn into global. Then we have a recession. Then we have a huge energy crisis, huge. So what this is happening is, if you look at, and I think some of you were mentioning earlier, if you look at the data of tax to GDP, corporate income tax incidence is minimal if compared with indirect taxation. So the question here is for you academics, not for companies, because companies, whatever they have to do, now you're going to see that there will be an increased pressure by government regulators to regulate even more, and companies will have to adapt, at least for ESG reason. I think Isabel Berlin said very clearly, do we need right now a project like Pillar 1? Because, or even Pillar 2, because at the end of the day, what companies will do, I don't know if Netflix will do it, possibly will do it, is do you think that with all this increased layer of taxes, multinational will absorb this, or will be consumers? Because that's something that I'm not really sure about, depending also on elasticity of demand. So maybe
With I'll tell you what I think. I think one crucial element in this is going to be the strength of the market. And I'll give you an example. We here were thinking internally that it never went public, but when many European countries started going crazy about the digital service tax, right? We thought maybe because we do that, we copy what Europe does. Should we do that? And we read the proposed digital service tax directive, and my opinion was never do this. And I'll tell you why. The digital service directive, so my advice to the Serbian government was run away from this. The digital service directive introduces, because we are not a member of the EU, introduces a concept of a one point of call for compliance. So essentially, for compliance purposes, a digital business like Netflix would have to deal with a digital service tax for a market of 500 million people, and the purchase power of those 500 million consumers. Now, since we're not a member of the EU, if we copied the law, then that compliance cost would have been relatively the same for a market of 7 million and our purchasing power. So what you would do at Netflix, you'd cut us off. You'd say that is not a market worth staying.
I don't think
Now,
so.
I could live without Netflix, but I don't think the Serbian business community would survive being cut off from the marketing positions on Facebook, Google, or
True.
YouTube. So
True. No, but the point is, at the moment where we are right now, do you think that in a situation where we would have to comply with an amount A in, let's say, 170 countries, from a compliance standpoint, is it more expensive for us to comply with amount A, or at least knowing that there is a specific percentage of DST that then I need to pay to a country. At least at the end of the day, with as we are right now, I don't know where we are better off. By the way, yesterday, France, on the contrary, they are coming with a very ambitious energy plan now, where they are going to say, well, please, now, you content provider of streaming or OTT, please track how much time each user spend on time using the service, because I want to know how much energy the data servers in the countries consume, because possibly you will have to reduce in order to save energy. And the same is going to go for temperatures in public buildings, for government officials, and so on. So to your point, I think that where we are living right now, possibly it should be a more focus on indirect taxation to answer real problems of people, real problems, rather than focusing on, yes, give me a tiny bit more of pillar one. And we know, I mean, we were discussing earlier with Vikram some extreme example that I'm not sure it would be the developing world, the one better off from pillar one as opposed to the developed world. Because I think we are doing a lot of exercises here that are theoretically wonderful, but are they addressing real life problems? Nowadays, in 2022, do we need pillar one in 2022?
I will tell you one thing, and again, I'll reach out to what because I think we might share the ailment of what Charlotte says. I don't sleep at night, also, and I suffer from anxiety attacks. Now, in addition to this conference, which gave me a lot of anxiety attacks,
I'm sorry I
uh,
added that
uh,
lot to you.
my wife suspects that we have an affair, but that's another point. So
But I clarified it to her that we don't
absolutely.
yesterday. I told it to her. Yeah.
The thing that what Gianmarco said, I don't sleep at night because of global warming. I don't care about Pillar Two. I've never stayed up because of Pillar Two, and it is not Pillar Two is not or Pillar One is not a topic capable of keeping me up at night. But global warming is. The demographic issue and the talent loss is. The viability of our societies is. And that's, I think we should focus on that.
But there
Yeah.
is also one thing that, okay, you can call it right now, is it the right time? But the fact is that algorithms that you, for example, you guys use are coming out of our habits, and you're making money out of our habits that you can interpret well, and that you're not being, let's say, call it charge. As I said, as he said, I know nothing about taxes, so I apologize. So if you're not being charged for that, and I don't want to go into Google or some other examples. I mean, this is all coming from like digital world, not those are the issue of there. And I think this is something that needs to be addressed, especially in today's world of, complete inequality. So in that sense, when is going to be the right time about that? Because we went from COVID to wars to energy, inflation. Now the interest rates are going to go up, when they're going to come down. So we can talk for next 5-10 years, not a good right time. And all along, we are seeing huge valuation of technology companies without actually this being distributed. And I'm talking as an IT guy.
Can you give please the mic to Svetlana?
I think what Gianmarco said is really important. And as lawyers, we sometimes don't think about economic incidence of tax. We find like, yeah, in the end of the day, tax end up something. But the whole project on Pillar One was supposed to tax multinationals, US multinationals. Do we tax multinationals with withholding tax? Indeed, with all this market power that actually we target still the biggest multinationals, we don't target smaller multinationals. They have huge market power. So we have seen lots of statistical data that the prices increased exactly on the amount of withholding tax, and probably the prices will increase with pillar one as well on the how much they will spend on compliance, that how much European consumer is going to spend more on these services. Probably that's going to be the end result. So the question is like, what do we achieve? Do we actually get any share from US multinationals? Do we have anything reallocated? Or we simply tax our consumers, making the prices even higher, making inflation even more difficult? And with all what we have now, maybe I would agree that maybe it's not the right time.
Also, Nebojša, you touched upon something which is, I think, very important, and I think it's an appropriate note to finish up this conference, and that is that we you said you don't get the younger generation, which is absolutely true. Plus, it is normal. it is not normal. My grandfather was a pediatrician, and he was a cardiologist, he was a pediatrician, a doctor, and he worked with kids his whole life. And he had a saying that please God save me from a docile child and a sexy grandmother, neither of two are normal. So he was not very sophisticated in our modern politically correct terms, but yeah, it's normal not to understand the young because they are young. We were not understood by our parents. That or at least that should have been the case. But if we are now, but what you, I think one thing that I would correct is that when you said and the young, well, in our world, when you're 30, we call you young. When you are 35, we call you young. We up to 40, we call you young. And you are on the job market for 2 decades. You're not young by the standards of the age in which our tax rules were written. So I think that perhaps instead of saying the young, we should actually be doing something, because if you say, well, you should understand the young, we draw the. I think that the point that you were making, and I would agree with that absolutely, is that if we are writing rules for a world in which we live in, we should first sit down and understand it and comprehend the way in which it functions and not impose on it things that we have imagined in our tax world without understanding the world as it is. I think that this thing where you say, well, the people, because when you drew the Estonian example, my first instinct, I'm going to say this openly and honestly, my first notion was, well, send him an audit, make his life miserable. That'll discipline him. He'll pay up once we put him through the joys of administrative procedures. So they're just spoiled. So they should be disciplined. But I would absolutely agree with you if you say no, that's the wrong approach, because then they will go get up and leave because they do this with me as their employer.
Yeah, you know what? The Estonian guy will go to United States, and then you have a pillar three trying to tax Estonian guy. So in the end you lose. And I'm not just saying not understanding young is a difficult thing, but at least seeing where the world is going in a sense. Because I've been for 2 days listening about PE, and I think that you try to explain to young kids what PE is in your terms, they will tell you it doesn't exist. Because in this Discord that I was mentioning, kid is sitting tonight in Belgrade and is going to sit through the weekend playing the video game, and the person who is going to play with him on a team is going to be from Kuala Lumpur and Vancouver, and he's going to think, or she's going to think, that this is really close. And in your world, this is very difficult to get to these places. So in that sense, talking to these kids about PE or any other stuff that you mentioned the last 2 days, it's a bit fruitless.
I'm one of the people that, when I were young, I refused to cross the bridge. I thought this was a different world where we are right now. That back in the old city, it's fine. So, but thank you. We are now at 5:30, so I'll get up for a second because we are sorry. I would like to thank both Charlotte and Nebojša for a wonderful insight. Uh, and and we wanted to end it on a note to hear from people who will give us a different perspective, and I'm really thankful for this because it's been, I think, quite thought provoking. Now we have come to the end. So, but you will have to bear with me for a few minutes because I would like to say a few words before we finish up. So,
Svetoslav, just before you make some final comments, I think let Andres and Mario and me just say.
before the three of you say something, I
Okay,
need
all right.
I need something said. Now, I have heard Professor Kostic too many times for these 2 days for it to be in good taste. And I have an issue with it. I don't feel well about it. So I want to share something, and I would ask Lydia also to come up here. So, first of all, when 10 years ago, if I were to say the following names: Vikram Chand, Andres Baez Moreno, Mario Tenore, the only notion that I would have and a hope that I would have was the song I Want to Be in That Number. But that would be just a hope. And now that hope actually has come true. And I would like to say to these three gentlemen that it's been an incredible privilege, joy, and a dream come true to work with you on this project. And you are yet to understand what an honor and a privilege that is for me. The respect that I have for you is, and it is, that's whenever I hear Professor Costa during this conference and I don't hear their names, I don't feel well, and I wanted to share this with you. They've been a part of this completely. The intellectual effort in drawing this program, in setting up this conference, in helping me, in dealing with my anxieties, in having this hysterical person yelling and still be understanding and supportive and always providing inspiration and ideas that I can't take credit for. So that's, I think, something that. So I'll give you the floor, but I needed to get this off of my chest because they deserve it. That's one thing. The other thing is truly anxiety attacks are a horrible thing. I suffer from them, and I had many of them because of this conference. Behind the grandiose words conference secretariat is this person here. That's our doctoral candidate from and she's an assistant professor. She's very modest. That's in your terminology, which I've never respected hierarchy, and I still don't, and I don't care. So in my translation, that is an assistant professor. She does the work of one, so why shouldn't we call her one? And she does her work very well. So I would like to thank her for all the things that she has done, and she made this possible. From a technical, from an organizational perspective, she's been an incredible help, and I owe you a debt of gratitude. So I would like to thank you. You've not noticed her, but behind those words, it's just her. And so, and she has to deal with me again. That's not something which is. So now that I've said my piece, I will give you guys the floor.
I'm sorry you're going to hear your name alone again. So I won't miss the opportunity to thank you again and to repeat what I said this morning. And again, I think there is no better description of who you are and what you've made here than a perfect combination of kindness and efficiency. So I repeat exactly what I said this morning because that's what I have always thought about you, and I have again checked that the diagnosis was correct. To the audience, we are academics. The academia has somehow also a part of a show. We have downed the show here. So I don't know whether we fall under 17 or not. But anyway, what we have seen here is the show that is fun. We learn about the show, but I would like to remember the audience that this is just the first part. And we were determined from the very beginning when we started this that all this show was just ancillary to the book that is coming. Because the book was really the amalgama of this whole project, as it will be on the second Congress, the third, and so on. So after the show, I hope the show has generated what the show must generate, which is kind of the appetite for what is coming. So 2023, the book, and of course, keep on track of what we were doing. We will organize other smaller events. Don't worry, no more attacks, Svetislav. But again, thank you very much, Svetislav. Thank you very much, Vikram. Thank you, Mario. Thank you, all speakers, discussants. It has been a fantastic show. Thank you.
Will be very short. I feel incredibly privileged. I am the only one who is not a professor here, so I hope I accomplished my function, to bring some real and practical expertise. I must tell you that, I mean, don't take it bad. It also is also valid for me. You have always this wise role, between the four of us. So this is something I really acknowledge, and I think you deserve this tribute. So thanks a lot, Svetislav, and I'm sure tomorrow I will be missing, this this preparation, this preparatory work, and I can't wait to start thinking, about the next adventure together. Thank you very much.
No, I'll just keep it short and simple. Well, the work's not yet done. The book is still there, so you have to edit it. So a lot of work is still going to come out of this event. And actually, I think we've thanked each of us a lot. But one group of people, I would just like to thank. You know who all you are. Thank you for supporting this event, the sponsors especially. Without you, it would have been really difficult to pull this event off, but with your kind and generous support, we have managed to do this. So thank you all. You know who you are, and yeah, we look forward to collaborating with you in the future too. Thank you.
So Vikram did what was supposed to be done, and that is really honestly not only to thank our generous sponsors without whom this event would have not been possible. I hope that we have done you proud, that you are happy what your money was spent on. You'll get a report. We're meticulous. Also, I would like to thank our guests, our chairs, our panelists. Thank you very much for coming here. I hope we've been good hosts. Next time it'll be even better. And just again, for our chairs, our panelists, and our authors, our faculty, I'm waiting for you in the lobby at 8 o'clock. The bus is waiting, and we're going for another dinner. So at 8 o'clock sharp, don't be late, Gianmarco.
Yeah, exactly.
The conference is thus closed. Thank you so much.
Mika, we have to take a picture.